Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Followers, likes, double tap. Now they control your life.
What is going on, beautiful people? Welcome back to the 817 podcast. And man, do we have a show for you this go around. We have two interviews. Last episode, we made a back call to two people, and the back call got to them. Jimmy. Both responded, and both on the docket in 1 week. So really excited to have Jared Williams, council member for District 6, and Austin James with Now.Town, which does great research on urban development. Jimmy, I'm really excited for this episode.
Yeah, me too. The way we're going to do it, we're not going to cover any stories the way we traditionally do. We're just going to talk with Jared first about the curfew and other things going on in city council. So that'll be more of the short story side. And then Austin with urban development is going to be the more concept, big story. So first, we've got Jared coming on. Dr. Jared Williams was elected the first African-American to represent District 6 in 2021, and he is the youngest council member ever in the history of Fort Worth. He represents over 108,000 residents in South and Southwest Fort Worth, which is where he was born and raised. He has dedicated his life to making a difference in Fort Worth and is focused on being the game changer needed to build strong neighborhoods in the district that he loves so dearly. So with that, here comes Dr. Jared Williams.
Cool. Well, let's just go ahead and start with, can you give us an overview of what, as if like people don't know, can you give us an overview of what is going on with the curfew and where you stand with the curfew, and like why should we be talking about it right now in Fort Worth?
Yeah, absolutely. Back in 1994, the city council established a curfew ordinance that essentially restricted curfew or enacted curfew hours on minors, anyone 17 and under. And it created a Class C misdemeanor for any kids who were, out in public spaces between the hours of 11 p.m. To 6 a.m. Sundays through Thursday, and then 12 a.m. To 6 a.m. on weekends, basically. And so within that policy, there's a clause called a sunset date, which is important context as to why we're talking about it right now. That sunset date basically says that by state law, every 3 years, municipalities who have curfew ordinances in effect are required to reevaluate the curfew ordinance based on its effectiveness. And I think that's a really important clause because it creates opportunities for conversation about the effectiveness of the policy. It gives the community and council members the opportunity to ask questions such as, does this ordinance or is this ordinance producing the outcomes that the council and community originally set out to achieve every 3 years? And so the reason it's on the agenda and kind of a hot topic lately is because we're at that sunset period. And as a council member who represents the community that I was raised in, grew up in, I think it's really important on this decision as well as a number of other decisions that we ask that question, is this policy 30 years later having the impact positively that we hope it would? And so for me, I took that opportunity very seriously. Engaged residents, engaged staff to ask the questions about what the effectiveness is. And that's where we are right now.
So I guess the last time that it did sunset was before we even started the podcast. I don't remember as much conversation happening around it then. Is this like one of the first times where there has been this much back and forth on it, or does this kind of happen every 3 years?
I'm not sure to what degree debate happened before I was on council. I will say that as a council member, my first time learning about the curfew ordinance was when I was on council. And I grew up in Fort Worth, right? And so, that for me in and of itself was a learning opportunity to better understand, what is this ordinance, what was the intent, and what is it actually doing. And so, the questions that I asked were really around, who's, being cited for this. I know that staff had mentioned during kind of our work session discussions about whether or not to reauthorize this ordinance. Around this ordinance, in part, was put in place to prevent crime, right? So then my next question is, okay, well, what's the data in correlation between the number of curfew violations with that were also a situation where youth also, were involved in other offenses as well. And so I went down that road and asked those questions. And, the answers that I had, really inspired me to continue to engage with my community and my district about, is this indeed an ordinance that is doing what we all want to do, and that is to keep our children safe. And so I'll just throw a couple of numbers out there. Since 2015, there's only been 832 citations written. And in the city of Fort Worth, we have 256,000 residents who are under the age of 18. We look at that on an annual basis. That's about 100 citations a year, which means it's impacting 0.03% of our young people, right? So, that was something that was of interest to me. The other thing that was interesting is, of those 832 violations, only 11 of those violations had an additional offense. And those 11 offenses, 0 were for crimes against persons and crimes against property, right? And so for me, that was concerning, because if this ordinance was in fact supposed to keep our kids safe and also reduce crime, one, we're only seeing a small percentage of this ordinance, citing our youth. And then the other piece of it is, we don't have the evidence to support that it's in fact, preventing crime. And so I think those data points are really important. I know that, we also had conversations around how this impacts specifically our teenagers and our boys disproportionately, and then also our boys of color. And so to me, a lot of those were red flags for me to engage with my community. That's why we hosted the only listening circle in this past 3-month period. It's a town hall that we have periodically or quite regularly with our constituents about issues that impact them. And we take the conversation into our neighborhoods and get their input. I always say this seat is not Jared Williams' seat. This is all of our seat. And so that's why we have listening sessions, to make sure that as we're having conversations about policies at City Hall, that those conversations on my part are informed by the residents that we serve.
Yeah, you have the current ordinance is set to expire February 13th. And it seems like your peers and the council just said, hey, the state is also discussing this. Let's see what they do. Can you give me the different, they could be the same, but what does this conversation look like at the state level? And then what does this conversation look like at the local level? And where's the conflict or alignment?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is not just a conversation happening in Fort Worth, as you said. It's not just happening at the state. It's happening all across the country. And it's really around this idea of status offenses. Status offenses are essentially offenses that wouldn't be illegal for adults, but yet a local jurisdiction creates some sort of law in the books that makes that offense illegal for folks under the age of 17 or whatever the age limit is, right? And so the reason, to me, that's such an important conversation is, status offenses are things that we see that happen all the time in our community, right? An example is kids running away from home, whether there's trauma at home or whether they're experiencing some trauma that they just need to get outside of, their normal space. If it's a curfew, breaking a curfew, whether they came home for work, right, on a late shift, or whether they're leaving a football game and going to IHOP and either knowingly or unknowingly knows that there's a curfew in effect, right? And status offenses, to me, are problematic because they expose our kiddos to the criminal justice system and criminalize, in my opinion, activities that are within their constitutional rights. I think the other thing that's problematic about curfew ordinances is, in my opinion, it doesn't create a partnership between our parents and guardians, right? Our parents and guardians, all want their kiddos to be safe, and it's their right to be able to set the curfew. For my baby girl Janelle, she'll have a curfew at 9 p.m. when she's 13 or 14. And I know a lot of parents. There's a lot of responsible parents who want to have that flexibility and be able to utilize their rights to be able to parent in a way that's best for their child. And so that conversation is happening not just in Fort Worth, but in the state. There is a bill on the that's en route through the legislative process that essentially would repeal cities' ability to enforce curfew ordinances. And I just want to set the record straight. I think we all agree that we want our kids to be safe. But I think the safety of our children is a 24/7 job, right? It's not just between the hours of 11 and 6 a.m. I think, we, as a city, if and, when we're taking issues around the safety of our kids, I think it's important that we really think comprehensively and holistically about what does it take for our kiddos to be safe around the clock. And that involves engaging our parents, engaging our students in those conversations to ask them, what does it take for you to be safe?
Yeah, on that note, talking about what as a city we can do to help keep our kids safe, you, in response to the curfew, have brought forward the Care for Minors proposal. Can you walk us through what that is, what went into it, and what you're hoping to see come out of bringing that to the table?
Absolutely. So the resolution that, I proposed and that was co-sponsored by Councilman Nettles, really birthed out of conversations that we had in our District 6 Town Hall, at a conversation that we had at the dais, at City Council meetings, and also during work session. And it was an opportunity, I thought, to be able to really take a holistic look at what we heard and say, what is the solution that ultimately keeps our kids safe around the clock? And so, this resolution is very clear in its intent in doing that in a number of ways. But overall, the goal of this resolution is to ask council to support directing city management staff to develop a plan, an implementation plan that aligns with the framework in which this resolution is setting. And to bring back to council what that plan looks like, and ultimately what are the budget implications for that. So by no means does voting on this resolution fix the problem. It's a step in having a conversation holistically about what does it mean to care for our minors. The CARE resolution is an acronym. It's the Child Assistance and Response and Engagement Plan that ultimately asks city management to develop a holistic approach to diverting our kids from the criminal justice system who are involved in status offenses and minor offenses. We know the trauma and the impact that prematurely introducing our kids to the criminal justice system has, not only on their growth and development into adulthood, but also very real impacts that it has on their education. And we know how important seeing our kids be successful in the K-12 space is to having thriving adults who lead forward into the next generation. And so this Care for Minors plan ultimately does a couple of things. One, it asks staff to look at what's the feasibility of establishing what we call Care for Minors teams all across the city that encompass social workers, mental health workers, that encompasses our first responders like police, EMT, and fire, to take a around-the-clock approach to kids who are perceived as being involved in status offenses. What this system would allow is for folks to call a non-emergency line, whether it's parents, teachers, educators, to report to this non-emergency hotline, whether a kid is skipping school, ran away from home, is under some type of nonviolent distress. And this Care for Minors team would be able to respond to that child in a wraparound approach, and also partner with the parents and guardians throughout the interaction with that child and ultimately help them get to a safe space and a place of care. Um, and all of that is diverting them from getting a citation and going through a court system for a traumatic experience that they may be having, or just being a kid and not doing anything wrong, in a serious level offense. And so that's pretty much the plan. It also, requires some training. One of the things that I was concerned about the curfew ordinance is for 30 years, we didn't give our staff, including our PD, the tools to be able to understand, to be able to implement the curfew ordinance. For 30 years, there was no specific training around the curfew ordinance. And so I think, in the wake of what we see with Tyree and Memphis, and I think it's just so important that as cities, we deliver city services to the highest level because, our residents depend on those services and their life depends on that. And so this is a caring approach. That's something we've heard a lot throughout the conversations around the curfew ordinance. And my hope is that this resolution becomes the starting point of a discussion of how do we holistically care for our minors and keep them safe 24/7.
For residents who don't follow council meetings or the processes of how cities move on something like this, what's kind of next steps for you? Like what does this need to look like in order for it to be funded and supported?
Absolutely. So the council's role is very clear in our city government and our city charter. We have the authority to set policy, which creates framework for then staff to implement protocols on the ground of how to fulfill that policy. We also set budgets every year, so we're responsible for overseeing the financial resources of the city and being good stewards of not only our enterprise revenue funds, but even more importantly, the taxpayer dollars that we all pay. And then we're also responsible for hiring and firing the executive leadership team. And so that includes city manager, city secretary, city attorney, city auditor. And so in that purview, setting a resolution like this, it's important for me that we stay within our role as a city council. And the spirit of this resolution is to set goals of what, I would like to see based on what I heard from residents and from conversations in the work session. That ultimately, see a program that cares for our minors in a comprehensive way 24/7. So now that resolution authorizes staff to go look into it, right? And so in order for them to be authorized to do that, this resolution would have to pass on February 14th. This resolution is coming up and it requires a majority vote on council. If and when this vote is successful, then that would give staff the direction to, really do the nuts and bolts work of, what possible partnerships are available, right? Like there's county resources already available for mental health and social work. We already have first responders that, serve all across the city. So how do we coordinate those resources that are available and what costs are associated with that level of coordination for implementing that? And all of that is the work of city staff. Down the road, before the next budget cycle, they'll be bringing back a plan that the council will consider as a part of the overall city budget cycle, which happens in August and September of this upcoming year. So that's a bit of the timeline. It's by no means the final say when we vote on February 14th, but it's the beginning of really taking a comprehensive approach to solving a problem that we all care about, so much, and that's the safety of our kiddos.
Is there anything else specifically about the curfew that you feel like we missed or haven't talked about yet?
Yeah, so the other thing is, y'all mentioned that the curfew is set to expire. That will be no longer in effect on February 13th. However, council could still take up action on that. I don't believe that we are at this point. And so February 14th would then be the vote on this resolution, which ultimately would take a comprehensive approach at dealing with this issue. So for our residents who are really concerned, about our kiddos being out late at night and the safety risks that may be associated with that. I completely understand that. And, the goal of this Careful Minded resolution is not only to ensure that our kiddos are safe at night, but also, during the school day, in the after school time hours, et cetera.
Yeah, it's that stability. It's that they can be comprehensive throughout their day makes a lot of sense. And it's well, what's your kind of take on like communicating to your peers, getting support for it? What are the things that you're hearing? Are there concerns and things like funding? I'm imagining, or how do we fit this in? What are some concerns, and then how do you try to advocate? Hey, we can solve these.
Yeah, I'm more hopeful than ever about our ability to solve tough challenges like the safety of our kids. Also recognize that there are some concerns that have been reported on here lately. One of the concerns being that this is too expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that conversation is way premature. City management hasn't even been authorized to develop a plan and assess how much that plan would cost. So we're very much too early to say how much it'll cost. The other thing I would say is it's less about the expense and it's more about the level of coordination for the services that are already available and ensuring that we're providing them in a wraparound way. I remember growing up and I would walk to the store and there were several neighbors who had the green light to check on me from my parents to make sure that I was okay and to make sure that I got back home safely. And that's essentially what these teams are doing. The other thing I would say is, in this world of public safety, um, we budget and prioritize what's important to us as a community that we value. I mean, we all know that we want safe neighborhoods. We want our kids to be able to walk to the store, come home from working at IHOP or Whataburger, right, or wherever they are, and ensure that they have safe travel back home. I mean, what I would say is, not only how much is the value of public safety work, but especially when it comes to our kids. The other thing I would say is that um, this resolution is only and this framework is only the beginning of a larger conversation on how we keep our kids safe. I was fortunate to be able to spearhead the process of developing the 1 Second Collaborative, and I know that there are some folks that are wondering how is this resolution different than the 1 Second Collaborative, which is specifically designed to address and prevent gun violence. We were able to partner with the county to invest $6 million into a collaborative organized by United Way, but that would engage a community of residents and organizations to specifically address youth gun violence prevention in a very specific way of conflict resolution for kiddos who we know are considering or at risk of pulling the trigger, right? Gun violence and status offenses are two separate issues that our kids face that are both very real and threatening to their safety. And so I would say this plan is only, it's another building block to a number of things that I think are important to us as a city that we need to consider on keeping folks safe, especially our kiddos.
You said you're not sure how heightened this conversation got in the past. What do you think is the reasons that this gotten so big? I mean, we do our podcast every week, and every time we saw the curfew story, we were like, yeah, we don't need to talk about that. And then like a couple weeks left, and people are like, oh, now we're canceling meetings, and now it's like I'm like, okay, so I guess we got to talk about this. Why do you think it got so big this time around?
I think, for me, it was important that we asked the hard questions. Any policy, I don't care what the policy is, if it has a sunset date, we owe it to our residents to really deeply evaluate it. And I know sometimes, um, governments, governing bodies can get in the habit of rubber stamping policies and moving on because of expedience, right? And for me, this was an issue that was really important to constituents that I represent. And it's my job to carry those concerns to the dais. And so for me and some of my colleagues who also were receiving concerns, we thought it was important to go slow to go fast later. And that's why we continued it, 2 or 3 times from council meeting to council meeting to ensure that we're getting deep community engagement. Um, you know, I think that that's important for local government.
Yeah.
To me, it's where the rubber meets the road. The decisions that we make have very real impacts positively and sometimes negatively on our residents, within the community. And so, with every decision we make, I think it's really important that, as representatives, that we go and seek multiple perspectives, not just folks who are for an issue or against an issue, but taking holistically the input that we're getting from our residents and doing that kind of needle threading work of what's the core values and issues that our communities are facing around this particular conversation, and even more importantly, what solutions can we make ultimately to um, ensure that we're doing the widest amount of good for the folks that we serve.
Yeah. Well, it seems with us having a younger city council, um, that I feel like also allows us to be, it hits us home, I guess, closer as well. And
Yeah.
and speaking of a younger council, a lot of you are running for reelection now, for this upcoming ballot. Tell me, how was your first run at this? What was something you're like, man, this was spot on what I was expecting, and then what was something you're like, I wasn't ready for this. I didn't know this was going to be a part of it.
Yeah, I mean, I am incredibly grateful and humbled to have been able to serve these first 2 years. What's most humbling about it is like growing up in the district, on the southwest side of Fort Worth, going to North Crowley, and being able to represent the neighborhoods that did so much for me and my family. Um, you think of, like, I thought of that service, and didn't take it lightly when I was running the first time, but to actually be able to go to work day to day, and to be able to have an impact on issues that my neighbors care about, and to be able to ensure that their voice is amplified in City Hall. It's something that, like, I anticipated, but you don't really recognize it until you are in the moment and get to feel it. Um, I think in terms of surprises, uh, I will be the first to say that elected service and public service is not the easiest thing. I'm the youngest council member ever in the history of City of Fort Worth. I'm the first person of color to represent the district that I grew up in. And all of that, I don't say to brag or boast, but just to say, that there's a certain level of responsibility and weight that comes with that. And for me, that weight also comes with juggling, having a newborn, right? Having to work a 9 to 5 because council pays $23,000 a year, which is not a living wage.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
And council requires a lot of time, right? Like, for me, people ask me, how do I do it juggling so much? Working at the Tanner Food Bank, and also, um, you know, caring for a family and a newborn. And for me, it's hard work. It's hard work too, but it's also hard work. I feel a calling to this and a purpose that for me is beyond measure. And that's something that I don't take lightly. And so, although the time constraints was a bit of a surprise, I'm really proud of the way that me, my family, my community, my team were able to navigate sometimes very stressful moments filled with anxiety of how was I going to make ends meet from day to day. Um, but I'm really proud of all we've accomplished. I'll say this, we set out on this, very ambitious goal of this idea of what does it take to create a just and prosperous city. That's to me, it's the strength of our neighborhoods, which are the building blocks of the city. And over the past 18 months, we've worked on strengthening our neighborhood economy. We brought $290 million in private investment for commercial development. We set the framework for the Southwest Fort Worth reinvestment zone at the intersection of Alta Mesa McCart and McCart and Sycamore. We also worked to improve neighborhood safety. That's why we were here today. Not only ensuring that we invested in addressing and preventing youth gun violence, but we also ensured that we made bold investments in fixing our 911 system, ensuring that we had more neighborhood police officers, ensuring that we have really tough conversations about what does it mean to have a transparent and accountable government that is serving the people. And we also had tough conversations about, investing in simple safety measures like ensuring that every school has a crosswalk and a crossing guard to make sure our kids can walk across the street safely, or ensuring that no kid has to pay for membership fees at our community centers because our community centers should be the safe spaces that they want to go to. And I think equally as important, we strove to ensure that our office represented the voice and values of our community. And we held over 30 listening circles in 18 months, which is a lot of town halls for a single district. But the reason we did that is because we take issues very seriously that our neighbors are facing, and ensuring that we're listening to their voices, because ultimately they are proximate to the issues just like I am living in the neighborhood. And when we have intentional conversation together, that's how we create solutions ultimately that are long lasting and sustainable for our district.
Yeah, so looking forward to the May election. Some council members are having to run for new districts. You're still running for District 6, even though it's changed a little bit. What does that look like? Does it feel different going into this election? After last time was obviously really close. Also, what's like the strategy vision going into May?
I don't think elections and campaigning is rocket science. It's about at the core of it, it's asking people, for their vote, and ensuring that the message and the platform and the promises that you're making are reflective of the values of the district that you're seeking to serve. And for me, that's something that I take very seriously. January filing, right, that happened a couple weeks ago. That wasn't when we launched our campaign. Our campaign has never stopped because the conversations have to keep happening. And so every election, whether it's our election or not, we're engaging our residents about, hey, did you know it's time to vote again? Your voice is your vote in this democracy. And you have the right and should use that right to ensure your voice is heard. When I first ran for this office, I was a little bit disappointed in the historical turnout data. 5,000 people in a district of 108,000 people on average would come to the polls to make their voice heard, right? That's less than 5% of District 6 residents having a say at who represents them on decisions every week that impact them and their families right at their doorstep. And for me and my team, we decided we wanted to do something about that. So the last election, we saw 10,000 people turn out in a general election. And we went in the runoff and saw 15,000 people turn out in an election. And our goal as a team is to continue to push ourselves to reach more and more people. I'm committed to knocking 15,000 doors by myself. I know that we have a lot more doors to knock with this new district with over 95,000 residents in this district. And so our goal is to work to get as close to 100% of our residents showing up to the polls. And I'm committed to doing that. Our team is fantastic. And even more importantly, we all really love serving and having conversations with our neighbors about what they like to see in these next 2 years.
Yeah. Well, I have two final questions. I don't know. I can ask one, and if you have something, I'll let you run and give something. But mine is around. I'm imagining you don't want to hold on to that title as the youngest city council member that long. What is what is your take on have you seen your peers? Have you seen younger people in Fort Worth get more involved? What is your advice? How do you see us making it more normal for city council to look like the average Fort Worthian who's 33 and a half? I would love to hear your take on that.
Yeah, I don't wear the youngest council member badge as a badge of honor. I really I share that mostly to tell our audience or whoever I'm engaging with that anything is possible if you live on purpose and you roll up your sleeves and you get it done. And believe in yourself. And that's the message that I really stress to young folks. Last week I did a listening tour in high schools where I was talking to high school juniors and seniors at Southwest High School and a number of other schools. just telling them about the importance of, voting whoever they vote for, and the importance of, public service as a career pathway. And I think that that's so important for us in Fort Worth. I remember my own educational experience wondering, like, when was civics and civic engagement ever really just caught at a nuanced level? And I don't remember that being a part of my K-12 curriculum and experience. And to me, that is a vulnerability to our democracy. And so I've committed myself to doing everything that I can to ensure that we're engaging young folks in this process. I'll give two examples. One, on my campaign team, we bring on interns, whether they're in high school, whether they're in college, or whether they're, deciding on a second career and want to take a dabble into, campaigning and working for or working to earn people's votes. And the other part is, I think it's important for folks like us to build the bench. And so that's why I hired the youngest district director ever in the history of Fort Worth, with Mr. Kendall Locke. He graduated from North Crowley High School, I believe at 16 or 17, with his associates and his high school diploma. Went to UNT, and he just graduated in December. Now he's working on Capitol Hill as a deputy chief for a Congress member at 19 years old, right? And I think that that's so important, that when we when we have an opportunity to lead wherever that space is, whether it's in the government or whether it's, in our various spaces and places, it's important that we reach back to the next generation of mentor. My grandma was big on that. My dad was big on that, right? A lot of our families, you learn things from your elders, and then they hopefully give you a chance to kind of put that into motion and action. And so I take that really seriously in building the bench of our next public servants in Fort Worth, and I'll continue to do that.
All right. Yeah. Well, this question doesn't need to make the show because it's kind of right on your 9-to-5 job. I know Tarrant Area Food Bank just had like this big announcement around like becoming a part of a national conglomerate of like food and maybe feeding like 500,000 people. And like, it just seems like a lot of great work's happening there. Is there anything you can kind of share with that and what that looks like?
Yeah, I want to be cautious of my hats because I'm on a campaign hat and don't want to mix work, but I will say that the Tarrant Area Food Bank is doing really great work. It's so important. Global food insecurity is unreal, and inflation has exacerbated that, really forcing our neighbors to make really hard decisions and stretch the dollar beyond how far it can stretch to provide basic necessities for themselves and their families. And so our residents all across the 13 county service area are resilient. And, sometimes in times like these, it's important that we have resources available to ensure that, when our families and neighbors are facing crisis, that they have the resources that they need to get back on their feet. So I'm really proud of the work that they're doing, and it's really cool to see all that they've accomplished.
Awesome. Well, Jared, thank you for jumping on the 817 podcast and joining Jimmy and I. And, we look forward to advocate and support everything you're doing for teenagers and for your community, and just your story in general, super inspiring to all of us.
Man, thank you, EJ. Appreciate y'all for all that y'all do.
We are really excited now to dive into our second interview with Austin James, who runs the social accounts and website Now.Town. Now.Town, since 2016, has been covering changes to the urban landscape of Fort Worth. Their goal is to keep neighborhoods informed, promote excellent development, and champion Fort Worth to a better future. So whether you are interested in architecture, transportation, real estate, whatever it is that goes with urban development of Fort Worth, Now.Town is the place to follow. We have followed his account for a long time. Yeah. So we are really excited to connect with him and see what he has to say about development.
Yeah, I put like Austin in like the Colemanna energy area for me, like just like people who do like the real work. And I'm really pumped for this interview and finally getting to connect with him.
Which, speaking of Nicole, who is no longer at the Star Telegram, this is her last week.
Yeah.
So shout out to every, Star Telegram reporter that comes in, does good work. We are always sad to see you go, and Nicole is the next one who's moving to Jacksonville.
And I feel like this is like we just like messed up his interview by like bringing up some sad news because really, guys, Austin is like someone who does like the best. Like every straight up every Sunday when we record, I will look at Now.Town and see what his recent post is, see what his recent tweet is, and yeah, this is going to be some great information on this pod. So here comes Austin.
Well, I grew up in Mansfield, so I've always lived in Tarrant County. And of course, it's a suburb, so it's kind of once I was getting older, I was always interested in cities, and I played SimCity and all that. And when I turned 16, I was like, hey, I'm gonna go adventure out. And first, I went the wrong direction. I went east, and I was like, man, this is a lot. This is overwhelming. And I was like, I'm gonna go see what's over in this side of the town over here on that Fort Worth place, and just was like, hey, this is a lot more accommodating and interesting, and just felt really welcoming. So always kind of been into that. And I don't, it had always been in my backyard, and I knew about it a little bit, but I wasn't super intimately familiar with the city. So kind of got over here and really got into it. And then I think what really kind of spurred my interest in like actual what's going on locally was back in 2010 when the streetcar debate was going on. I was in high school at the time, so I wasn't paying a whole lot of attention, but it was kind of one of the first things that really got me like understanding how important local development and being involved in that and even local politics are.
Yeah, no. So tell me your like. So for those of you who may not have seen Now.Town and Austin's work, it's to me some of my favorite, like one of my favorite Twitter follows. Every week before I get onto the 817 podcast, I look at the tweets, make sure we're on the freshes about development. And so, can you talk more about how you got to being? You're talking about your first interest in it was 2010. So now you have over 10 years of time, really building a really cool kind of content generator for Fort Worth. Can you talk more about what you do there and what was the purpose of Now.Town?
Well, the first thing I'll say is that the two things that really inspire me are John Roberts' Fort Worth Architecture Forum. And so if you're a nerd about this kind of thing, you're on that website or you're reading it. And if you're not familiar with it, look it up. It's a great place. It's a great resource. And that's kind of just, again, it's a bunch of people talking cities, architecture. And I say a bunch of people, it's a pretty small group, but it's a tight group. And then, of course, if you remember Fort Worthology back in the day, that was run by Cara, she odds off in Portland now. And I guess that was a couple of years ago that she left. And there's kind of a vacuum, essentially, of news there. And I just really wanted to have, I thought it was interesting to know what's going on. And then I realized other people might as well. So I started it. It's been Fort Worth Urban forever. I'm kind of trying to get away from that branding a little bit just because there's a couple of other companies that are actually doing business with similar names. So I don't want to overlook at them or overlap with them. And so we've kind of been rebranding this Now.Town. And that's also the domain. So if you do Now.Town is the actual website.
Yeah. So what's what was like your original goal with getting it started, and how have you seen that evolve over the last few years?
The original goal, I guess I started initially the Twitter account in 2016, and just as a place to talk about what's going on and kind of make sure people knew what was going on too. Because I thought, hey, if I think this is interesting, other people are going to want to know what's going on in their neighborhoods. So I started that up, and the growth has been crazy. I mean, I have Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram, and there's over 15,000 followers on all four of those platforms combined, which is nuts.
Yeah, that's awesome, and it seems like a lot of room to grow. So now dive into your work, like doing this since 2016. Like dive into like how do you talk to Fort Worth to people who may have never been here, or people who want to learn more about why they should invest their lives or even their businesses in Tarrant County.
Ooh. I think it's an interesting place. It's growing a lot. We know that's a frequent topic. It's kind of like one of the big topics of the day of I guess the decade really. We were second fastest growing city between 2000 and 2020 in the US. So there's so much going on and everybody's talking about it all the time. And I say a lot like 10 years ago or 13 years ago or so now, there really wasn't a lot of like actual chances for urban living and urban development. It was just kind of it was suburban growth. It wasn't really anything was happening in the core neighborhoods, and it's kind of transformed the way that people look at the city, I think.
What has been like urban development Twitter and your work has, for me, like opened my eyes a lot to learning about how cities operate and how they grow, and like asking the question of what do I want the place that I live to look like as far as like walkability, public transit, development, etc. Do you feel like you have gotten to like enter into those conversations and spaces with different organizations around the city because of your work, or what's kind of like the feedback that you get from people online and just around Fort Worth with the information that you put out there?
Yeah, I think I'll answer the have I been involved? It's been great because people have come to me and asked me my opinion on things. And when I say people, I guess I mean city officials and people in the planning sphere within the city. As far as like getting involved, I hope that the account just inspires people to make their voices heard, whether or not they want something or don't even. I guess it's kind of obvious that we are a proponent of growth. That I am a proponent personally. And of course, not all growth, but I want to see positive change, not negative change. And so hopefully that this inspires people to voice those opinions as well.
How do you see?
Is that well answered? I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's perfect.
How do you see the so like what is your like if you were going to give a kind of a TED talk on Fort Worth and its urban development or growth, like what is the one high point that you would want people to know, and then like what's like maybe a feedback point, or like this is where I would like to see us improve?
That's a good one. You're gonna have to edit this. I guess. What do y'all think? I really don't.
Well, I guess you're so intuitive. Maybe let's start like more with your how. Like, can you give me your how on how do you do what you do? Like, how do you stay so in tune with what's moving around in Fort Worth?
My how on, well, there's kind of two things that I do. Is A, I figure out what's going to happen. And you can do that by watching city council meetings, and there's dozens of other boards. There's zoning, there's downtown design review, urban development boards.
And you do that for fun? Like, do you do that, or is that part of work?
No, I do that for fun. It's weird.
No, that's awesome.
Don't laugh. No, and then you can scour. There's plenty of places where you can scour permits, either through the city or the state, or even the FAA. You can find stuff on there, because if you're building a tall building, you have to file that with the FAA. So that's a pretty interesting place to find stuff. And so it's kind of the first half of what I do is I really go and find things. And the second thing that I try and do is, as far as my coverage, is like cover things that are getting built. And that's a fun because I get to combine some of my favorite hobbies. I try and do a lot of those like construction updates that you see on the account.
Mm-hmm.
I try and plan those out like on bike rides, for example. Mm-hmm. And so it's a great way to kind of get out and actually see the city. And then, of course, I bring my camera with me, and photography is one of my favorite things to do. So it's kind of a weird combination of photography and construction. It makes me feel like a kid, but it's fun.
Oh, that's so smart.
Yeah, I think that's awesome.
Yeah, that's rad.
I've done that recently because it's terribly cold, so I've just been driving. Don't tell anybody that. You guys can do that.
Going back to you started talking about like urban development in the core, and that 10, 15 years ago, not really being something that Fort Worth was necessarily doing. Now, like, we're kind of warming up to it, but every time there's a zoning commission meeting or something is up for debate about building new apartments or building another big building, there's plenty of debate around, and I would say normally like local pushback from some of the more long-standing residents of the city. And so to me, like, that urban development is an area of improvement for the city, is like making more walkable, dense mixed-use communities. Where do you feel like the city is kind of landing on that right now? Or what does development in that nature look like for Fort Worth right now?
Yeah, I think it's you had to have density and you have to have population to support these places, and sometimes the way of achieving that isn't always popular. Like it's a lot of times it's through big apartment buildings, and those are obviously always a big debate, and uh, you know either from people not liking the density itself or down to people not liking the way they look. uh, it is crazy how much it's changed. I mean, the first like proper, you call them 6/1, where they're just those wood framed apartment buildings that you see all over. The first one of those built near Southside was not 10 years, it was 10 years ago. So, and now there's several of them, and more than half a dozen of them over there. And there's thousands of units that they brought to the neighborhood. And so the hope is that, those are supporting people that are living in those are supporting the local businesses and the local economy, and they're working in the near South Side, for example. Hopefully they're working in the hospitals, and it's giving people that work in those environments a place to live where they can live a more urban lifestyle. And I think my kind of definition of urban lifestyle is any development or area or neighborhood where the car is not the entire focus of what you're doing.
Mm.
So like you're getting around, there's options to get around with other modes of transportation.
Yeah, you have on your site, places that didn't exist in Fort Worth in 2010: West 7th Bridge, Dickies Arena, Sundance Square Plaza, Kimbell Piano Pavilion, South Main, all of Clear Fork, River District, and River East.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy how much it's changed. Like again, I have to ask people, how many of your favorite places that you go to didn't exist a decade ago or in 2010 or so? And a lot of those places, they're now places that people love and are icons and landmarks in the city. And so it's that's how we really are having seen that change. The 2010s were really an incredible year, or incredible decade for actually seeing investment and people living in and working in and
so
being entertained in these urban neighborhoods.
Yeah. How do you see transit moving forward need to be prioritized in Fort Worth?
That's a tough one because it's up to Trinity Metro, who is doing what they can. I think you can only do what you can with the resources you're given, and Trinity Metro's resources are not a massive amount. We know that this is an issue. Every other city has twice, or not every other city, but comparable cities like Dallas, Houston, San Antonio. I might be wrong there, so that might not be something to include. But they're getting twice as much money, and they have significantly larger member cities and catchment areas that they can pull from. So it's important. And again, Trinity Metro is kind of stuck where they're at, and they do have plans, and they're there's certain projects that they're trying to implement, and I think they've done a great job recently. They did the new bus routing system, and I think that's really improved a lot of things. At least it's been easier for me, I know, and so I think it's a thing that's frustrating because you want to see more of it, and also you don't have a lot of hope that there's going to be more. So I hope we can figure out, and I don't know what the solution is there, right? Like is it state level? Is it federal level where you can get more money to build more things? Do we even want that? Like, do the citizens want that? I don't know, but I hope that we do, and because having that is a critical component in actually making these urban neighborhoods work good.
Yeah, one data point you have here is the DART, Dallas's transit, was adopted in 1983 when Dallas's population was 934,915 people. That was in 1983, and that is really mirrored to what Fort Worth is today at 935,508.
So consider that DART, it has this incredible system of light rail today. It's the longest in the country, and they started planning that when Dallas was the same size as we are today. And there's a couple of differences there. I mean, like for one, I have a head start. We've already got two commuter rail systems already, commuter rail lines. And, we already have DART also had a significantly larger catchment area with those additional member cities that they have that Fort Worth doesn't have. Trinity Metro doesn't have those.
Yeah.
So get on it, Arlington.
Yeah. Jerry Jones has always had something to say about that. What gets you excited about the way you have seen Fort Worth development trend over the last few years? Like, obviously the early 2020 kind of like put a halt to a lot of things, and it feels like Fort Worth's development has kind of started trending in a slightly different direction as we have come out of the pandemic. So like what excites you about the way that Fort Worth is starting to develop now?
I think the most interesting development of post-pandemic is the fact that we have, if you've been downtown, you've seen Deco 969, which is the high-rise apartment building, and it's the first like proper new build apartment residential living building, and we did not have those really at all prior to. And my understanding, and I'm not a developer myself, but is that if you want to, you can't. Developers aren't building what they want to build; they're building what banks will give them money to build, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so banks had been looking at downtown and said, "Hey, there's not any of these high-rise apartment buildings. Why? So how can you prove to us that you can make this work?" And there never was. So nobody could ever do it. And so this new company from Nashville came in and said, "Hey, we're going to do it." I don't know how exactly they managed to pull it off, but they're doing that now. And since that has gotten going, you've seen, I think there's at least 3 other high-rise apartment buildings that are actually kind of in the proposal stages right now. And I've heard rumors of more. So I think that'll be it's kind of the most interesting thing is that we're seeing those, we're breaking that sort of 6 and 7 story plateau that we've had for the past decade.
Yeah,
At least
I mean,
downtown.
I know the public library sale, like that building is supposed to turn into multifamily with like mixed use retail on the bottom. That's something that we talk about a lot is like we want downtown to feel livable, and right now it has always been in sort of like flux because all the apartments are like way on the outside of it and not in that core right there. Yeah, I was just driving by that building, I guess yesterday, and it's pretty amazing how quick it has gone up once they started adding.
Really has. Yeah, it's only about 2 or 3 floors away from being topped out now, so just about as tall as it's going to get.
Yeah, I think so. One of your graphs on one of the things you were sharing is how much of downtown is expected to add spaces for people to live compared to other areas. How much is that was like pre-pandemic strategy compared to, I know there's a lot of fear around what's happening to office spaces now that work from home is more popular. The pandemic has made people less going to downtown. Dallas Morning News just had an article about how sublease space is growing very significantly, specifically in warehouse subleasing. So I guess like how much of this downtown strategy that you see happening was pre-pandemic thought out already compared to like, oh, we got to think differently because people aren't going to be, buying large buildings for office space.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of tricky because Fort Worth wasn't really building a whole lot of offices already anyway. Like that's, even back then we had Frost Tower was like the first significant office building that had been built in probably 15 years. And even outside of downtown, there's only a couple of office buildings that have been built at all recently. Two of them are just finished up. Well, there's the 701 on Magnolia down there, Magnolia and Hemphill, and then Museum Place has a decent amount of office space. But these are both, well, a little small. I mean, they're not high rises, obviously. So office space is already hard to come by, and we just weren't seeing it getting built here. And I don't want to go. I don't know how to go into those reasons. That's totally out of my scope of knowledge. But so I think that just seeing those residential, and even more importantly or more impactfully perhaps for downtown, is the hotels that have been really popping up. Like the amount of hotels that have been built in downtown has essentially doubled since 2009 when the Omni opened. So I don't know if there's any like kind of strategy that anybody was planning for that, but I think that just downtown was maybe already a little over officed, and so now we're just seeing that residential and hotel and even some entertainment and retail are kind of playing catch up now. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
What is your take on how Texas A&M kind of development, and then you also have Panther Island on the other side, influence downtown?
So Texas A&M is, um, I don't know really how to talk about it because everybody's been hyping it up to be like this really huge deal, and I think it will be. Obviously, it's going to be such a great. What happens inside of those buildings will be, so great for getting people jobs and just kind of elevating the profile of the city. And hopefully, we can get them all to stay. That's my big fear is we're going to set up all this big investment, and then people are going to come and go to school and get an education, and then we already had that issue elsewhere with the other places, or the other schools in town. So hopefully A&M can do that, and I think that's going to go hand in hand really with Panther Island because hopefully, and I think Panther Island's a great plan. I think it's really exciting that we could have this really incredible urban, this massive urban neighborhood, right, with awesome waterfront access and canal. It sounds like we're combining the best things of Austin and the best things of San Antonio, and we're just slamming those together and putting it in between the stockyards and downtown, which sounds like it's an incredible recipe for success, right? Um, so hopefully we can get that, going and built, and it really could be an incredible opportunity. And if it's desirable enough, maybe it'll be the place where in 10 years, those new Aggies coming to town will say, hey, let's set up shop. I want to live on Panther Island. I want to do my business there. Or, I think this is kind of a little subject, or off subject, but hopefully Panther Island doesn't turn into like Las Colinas, right? Where it's just, if you've been to Las Colinas, it's cool, but there's kind of a ghost town, and it's just like, the architecture out there is kind of garbage. Even there's like a lot of new apartments that are on that kind of the east side out there, and they just don't go together, and it's kind of a mess out there. And then it's obviously an incredible place for companies to do business because I don't even have, there's like Fortune 500 headquarters out there, multiple, I think, and just so many big office buildings, but it's just kind of dull. And that's just my fears. That's what I hope we don't see with Panther Island, is that it turns into something. It is designed and at like a very small macro level. When it really gets built out, hopefully it turns out great.
I love that, and I love that analogy. We're really big fans of analogies on the show. I'm gonna use it. I'm gonna use that one. I'll say my guy at Now.Town made it happen. Can you tell us how you got the name, by the way, Now.Town? Like, how did you get there from?
So
Fort Worth Urban?
I don't remember the year, but I'm sure this is a name that's bounced around. It rhymes with Cowtown, so people have been probably latched onto that for a while. The oldest use that I can find of it was in like a 1970s Chamber of Commerce brochure, where they say, "Hey, this is not Cowtown. This is Wowtown, or not. This is not Cowtown. It's Now.Town now, right?" And I thought that kind of was a fun name because it's the word town. You're talking about cities, so town plays into it. And so now, obviously, what's happening now in the town? I don't know.
Yeah.
It sounds cheesy.
I know,
but then I went out.
Yeah.
I went online and I was like, I had the website, and I realized you could buy .town as a domain, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm sticking with this.
Yeah. I was like, when I saw the brand change, I was like, oh, is he trying to do what he was doing for Fort Worth for other towns? Like, or were you going to try to scale this out and make this more of a
No,
thing?
we're sticking to Fort Worth. We're not going anywhere.
Got it. Yeah. Can you hit on you kind of briefly talked about hotels and that doubled growth in downtown, which is fascinating. Do you have any opinions or thoughts on like the Airbnb saga in Fort Worth and just like short-term rentals and like that kind of debate?
No. No, I know everybody's got a different thought on it, and I don't know where I stand on it. So I don't own any. I don't have any near me, so I feel kind of not impacted by it personally. So it's kind of
yeah. That's kind of about density. Well, give me this, because I remember I said something negative about density on like one of our first shows to like Brian, and was it Brian's? What's the guy who runs Fort Worth Magazine?
Yeah, Brian Kendall.
Yeah, Brian. And I was like, yeah, and I was like, do we really like? Is density really like a thing we really want? Because I guess my fear was always, Texas is known like, oh, this, like when people come to Texas from out of town, it's like, oh, space and houses and yards. And so like, do people come to Texas and now want the density that you can get in LA or San Francisco or is that going to be like something that fits with, and how does density fit in the Texas story, especially because Fort Worth is so attached to like the land and space kind of narrative. Um, I feel like that's always been something I've always I wonder how density is going to play, especially because so much of your residence space that you showed on that graph is downtown. And like, how is that going to be attractive to people who actually come to Fort Worth with the idea of, oh, I came here for space, but
Right.
now you want me to live like I live in London.
So Fort Worth, I just looked it up, has 350 square miles of land, right? So if we set aside, let's say 20, and that's way more than what we have, I would assume, and like our urban neighborhoods. You set aside 20 of those square miles, and you say 330 square miles, whatever you want to do. You can have as much single family homes and whatever you want to do with those. And then you just say, like, hey, let's make like 20 of these square miles into really good urban development. Why not have both, right? Like,
Yeah.
let's make these, if you're going to have suburban development, hey, that's great. People want to live in suburbs. They want space. I understand. Let's let them have it, give it to them and do it as best as you can. Same thing for urban development though, so make those urban areas as best as they can be. And then you have both. It's the best of both worlds, right?
How many people, like, what's the equivalent of 20 square miles of like good urban development city-wise?
Are you talking in Fort Worth?
No, in like how big is, say, San Francisco, space-wise versus, we can try and look this up at the same time too.
Yeah.
Like, how big of a city would that make Fort Worth? How many people can you fit in like 20 square miles of good urban development versus like where we're at now? I think that's an interesting question.
I'm looking this up because I don't know.
Are you allowed to say that about your own question?
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah. It's like when someone laughs at their own joke. Gosh, I'm hilarious.
So just as an example, and I am not saying that Fort Worth should be San Francisco, but San Francisco is 47 square miles, and it has 815,000 people. So, even if you take just a small chunk of the city and you really dedicate it to being good urban development, you'll also do, a ton of a population of that area.
Yeah.
And that's kind of one of the big reasons,
That's amazing.
Not that urban development should be pursued by cities because it's good for the environment. People are closer together. It's great for economies because same thing, economies, conglomeration and clustering. You've got, you just get more people in those areas. You get better economies from, the lands are valued higher. So you got downtown is the highest, where the most taxes come from. So you get in a city that's driven by property taxes, really, it's smart for the city to do that too, even.
Yeah, you solve housing issues, supply issues in a lot of ways too.
Social connectedness and community building.
That is the absolute worst pitch that I could have possibly made on like the overall subject of, hey, why cities are good. But there you go. There's a lot of reasons. You can look them all up if you're listening.
What is something that like frustrates you about the way Fort Worth develops? Like you're looking through permits, doing your normal research, and you see something, you're like, oh, really? Not again.
There's definitely, you get sick of seeing the same. I don't want to say sick, but like, this sounds cliche, but the out of town developers that just throw up stuff, there's so many great local developers, and you wish that you see the quality difference, right? And so that's one of the things that's always kind of like, and I see that in comments all the time too. And the paid Star Telegram Forward Report, you'll see comments on them and be like, why is this happening? So that's one. I think the other reason, and I don't know if we're going to touch on this in this question or not, but is that, cities and urban development should be for everybody. And in Fort Worth, they haven't been. It's been, I was listening to your interview with the guy from TCU. What's it, the professor?
Kyle
Walker.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was listening to Kyle Walker's interview, and he mentioned that there's only 3 districts that are like getting more white in Fort Worth, and those are near Southside, downtown, West 7th. And it's like, oh, that shouldn't be happening, because really cities and urban living, it should be cheaper, right? Like you can say you should have more housing, so housing costs should be less. You should be able to just not own a car. So that's a huge
car, gas, insurance.
That's a huge expense that a lot of people have. that urban living should be able to say you don't even need to have that. And so I think it's what's one of the really frustrating things is that we're seeing, and it's kind of ties into that whole gentrification thing too, of that, these are urban living and urban development has in Fort Worth been expensive. And I think that kind of a big part of the reason why is that, again, it really didn't exist a decade ago. So you don't have any like established, urban places to live where you can just, walk downstairs and you're in a nice walkable neighborhood. With the exception of downtown, and downtowns are always going to be a unique case there. But that really wasn't a thing that we have historically. So there wasn't something. So everything that we have that's urban is essentially new, and I think that's a big part of the reason why it's expensive. And that's also why it's exciting to see, Stop Six is getting some kind of proper urban developments. We're seeing that in Evans Rosedale over there, in the historic South Side. So I'm hoping to see that there's more of those where you'll see, not necessarily expensive, but and both of those developments are being done with like not by entirely private, right? There's some public input there. So I'm hoping to see more of that, where we can have communities that are really communities. I mean, again, urban living should be for everybody.
What is a city to you that you feel like is doing that well, or like a city that you appreciate how they've grown since you've like maybe visited it or across? It could be the country or it could be internationally.
I think people look at Austin all the time, and it's a negative example of this. It's the same situation going on there where they had downtown and that was it. And it's the same problem they're having there where it's just there's nowhere to live that's cheap, and the housing prices there are astronomical. I'm trying to think of a good example that I've seen really do it well. Like I was in LA. I went to the TCU game, which was a bad time. We won't talk about that. But I'm just driving around like that Inglewood area is so interesting because even it's not. I don't know what the housing prices are out there, but I know that it's not well known for being like nice necessarily. But it does feel like you could live there without a car. Around the stadium is a little weird, but I mean, LA is kind of a weird example there. But
yeah.
No, I mean, one of my best friends growing up lives in LA, and like him and his fiance were renting a house in Venice, and only one of them had a car for a long time because they just kind of had everything around them that they needed, and one of them was working remotely already. Then now they moved a little bit closer to downtown. And same thing, they're just kind of like, we don't go to Venice anymore because we have everything that we had there also here right around us. And we don't have a ton of need to like leave our little area.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully we can see those kinds of developments happen in Fort Worth where people have those where you have a grocery store and everything you need within a short distance.
Yeah. So when you think of Austin and are you someone who's like Fort Worth needs, like when people like often say like there's two types of camps in Texas of like, oh, Austin's like this, like the city we need to thrive to be. And other people are like, oh no, this is what we need us not become. Like, where is Fort Worth in that? Like, you feel like Fort Worth is on the journey in a healthy relationship of becoming like an Austin, or like we need to at all costs learn from Austin and not become what's now Austin today?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't want to see us become Austin entirely. I mean, there's some things that they've done well, and there's a reason people are moving there and paying a lot of money to do so. And I think it's important, that you strive to make your city better like that and desirable. But there's, Austin's obviously a classic example of it got expensive, it lost its culture, and so I don't want to see Fort Worth do that.
Yeah.
And so there's a balance you have to strike, right? It's just making sure that development happens equitably, and I think it's one of the things we're struggling with a little bit. But I think that's also, again, anything that you build, new stuff is expensive, right? So it's always a struggle to make change happen and do it in a way that is affordable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is a city in your mind that you visited that is similar to Fort Worth of 2010? Like the way you remember Fort Worth in 2010 Is there a city now in the country where like, oh, this kind of feels like Fort Worth back in the day?
This might give me some flack, but I feel like Fort Worth in 2010 was kind of boring. So it's like, I think of like small, like mid-sized cities, like, I don't, Oklahoma City, even Tulsa, Omaha, they kind of feel similar in size and scale. And then, they've all of the three of those cities have seen their own development too, but those cities kind of remind me of how we are or how we were back then.
Yeah, love that.
But I think that Fort Worth's another, big reason that we're not them is that we have, we're part of a larger metropolitan area here. And we have other incredible assets like the airport and, having Dallas and Collin County and whatnot nearby is kind of incredible. And it's cool if you live here too, right? Because you can never go to those places, but they're an hour away if you want to.
Yeah. Yeah, we talk a lot about, like, is Fort Worth going to lose out, like, from being DFW to becoming, like, Dallas, Frisco, Plano, with how much that area is developing? And, like, what in your mind does Fort Worth, urban development-wise, need to do to continue to, like, maintain and increase its identity in the Metroplex, as opposed to, people land at DFW, they go over to Dallas, now they can go up to Universal for a day. Maybe they don't need to make the drive over to the stockyards if the choice is between, going to see cows and going to see Minions and Trolls.
That's a heck of a sell.
Yeah.
I'm gonna vote for this. Can we combine those now?
Yeah.
Geez. I think I don't know how many people travel to cities just to go see like what the locals do, so to speak. But I personally do, right? Like, and I know a lot of people that do, and maybe that's who you want to cater to, right? Like, if we even, is that even something we want to cater to? I don't know. That's not my question to answer, but like, as a city, is that what we want to do? And I think, just continue building, quality and good neighborhoods, and people, if they're great, people will go to them. I was talking to somebody recently who's like, I go to San Antonio now. I don't go downtown. I go to the Pearl District.
Yeah.
So, we can see that here. If you have new things that are attractive like that, stick with it, keep doing it, do it better, do it more.
Kind of last question. What is something in Fort Worth that gets you really excited that people don't know about? Like, obviously we know about big high rise going into downtown or, museum place development, but like, what's a piece of development that you see coming down the pipeline that people might not know about that gets you excited?
I think right now, so if you go on to my website, Now.Town, there's a project map tab at the top there. I think it's a really handy tool if you haven't seen that or used that. And it kind of is I try to make it both visual and so you can see what's happening and interactive with the map, so you know where things are happening too. And so I'm not answering this question really well here, but if you're listening and you don't know and you want to go figure out what you're excited about, you can check that out. And I'm kind of not answering this because I don't know what to say.
Yeah. No, this is a great thing to
really
point
cool
people
stuff.
to.
There's some really exciting, just mixed use projects. I think that some of my favorite things that happen are these smaller ones, like the PS 1200 development that's going up off Magnolia. If you've seen the kind of Quonset hut looking buildings down there, that was done by a well-known guy who just won the AIA gold medal, which is a super exclusive. The only people that have designed things but worth that have that same medal they did the museums. And that's a cool little development. It's unique, and so those things get me excited. Presidio Interest is doing a really cool development off of South Main. It's nearly 100 units, if not more, and it has no parking. It's very, very urban.
Nice.
So that's a local group. So I think a lot of these, I think what makes me excited is these local groups that are doing cool things. Or I guess the PS 1200 one wasn't local, but local groups that are doing cool things here. And we're seeing kind of more of that, where it feels like local developers are saying that they like the city and they want to contribute to it in a way that's positive and quality.
Yeah,
that was kind of rambling. I don't know if I.
No, I feel like every time you say something or tweet something, I learn something, and so I appreciate you for coming on to the 817 pod. hopefully we can have you again down the road when more things come up. But it's really been great. How can we direct people on how to support your work and stay in touch with you?
Can I rewind real quick and ask y'all?
Yeah, for sure.
What projects are you excited about? I want to throw it back at you.
I don't feel like I'm so smooth like you and knowing everything.
Hey, you got a resource here.
I do enjoy, as a person who travels a lot and enjoys hotels. The like hotel culture downtown does excite me. Bowie House, right? Is that the name of the hotel that's coming in?
Say that one more time.
Bowie House
Bowie House?
Yeah. I say it like it's, Bowie, like the small town that my grandma was born in outside in.
Is it Bowie?
But yeah, I think it's Bowie. But yeah, just another like interesting hotel. Like the Sandman signature was also announced not too long ago. I think the like hotel scene gets me excited because it reminds me of Fort Worth's coffee scene 5-6 years ago when it was first getting started, and so everybody was like being really innovative, really creative, trying to like create their niche. And I feel like that's kind of what the hotel scene is going through right now, where we're getting a lot of really unique experiences that make me want to actually do like a staycation and spend time there and get to know their space, or just go hang out in the lobby bar.
Yeah.
I feel like we can't talk about hotels and local developers without also giving a shout out to Jonathan Morris.
Yeah.
And Hotel Dryce, because that's one of the coolest things that's happened in the last half decade, right? The Hotel Dryce is awesome. That's what I want to see more of, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Especially, local people taking industries that are typically more national and creating like a really unique space for locals and travelers to enjoy. Absolutely.
Yeah. No, yeah, I guess for me, it's just I don't have any specific development. I mean, kudos. I agree on the downtown hotel energy, but like, I guess what I'm excited to watch is just the relationship between like Alliance, Texas and downtown Fort Worth, like, and just like how it just develops as a whole macroly, just like it's its own city up there. It has its own energy. But like, because, looking at your work when you did the whole like Fort Worth city limits compared to other cities on Twitter, like it should be, it's Frisco, but it's like in our city. So it's like, I'm interested to see how that goes and grows, especially as both obviously get bigger.
Yeah, if somebody out there wants to start Fort Worth suburban, you should do it, because there's so much happening out there on the hub that I can't keep up with, right? Like that'd be way too much to even try. There's the growth is happening in every direction nowadays.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Austin, I would love to know where we can support, direct people. We'll put your site on the in the description notes. But any last minute things you'd like to say?
No, appreciate y'all bringing me on. If you're listening, you want to learn more, Now.Town, you can scroll down to the bottom. You can find all of my social. I'm most active on Twitter, even though Twitter is a weird place these days. It is an easy place to just to talk about. You can thread things together, and it can be short and concise. And that's what I like to be. So if you have one place, Twitter, but anywhere, that's kind of it.
Yeah, and really, I feel like the first time, like some of the first places I go to feel smart in Fort Worth is to his Twitter. I do it every week before I get onto this pod because it's super fresh. It's super insightful. And I just appreciate you coming on. I'm a big fan of like real people who I can never be like, because I'm not as like cool. So I like appreciate who you are and like what you do for Fort Worth.
I appreciate it. And I don't know if this goes here or not, but the other thing I would say too is don't just follow me, but as I'm not trying to be in place of local media. I'm trying to be with it, So follow the Weekly, the Star Telegram, the Report, Worth Magazine, all of them. Make sure they're all doing great things too. So it's a community effort
for sure. Well, there was that, Jimmy. 2 interviews, first time ever. 2 very different interviews, but we're here.
Yeah, we made it. I think it's interesting the way like both of those conversations can overlap while also having like their very micro and macro level details. And I mean, I think everything that we talked about with Jared plays into everything we talked about with Austin, and especially like fostering the youth of this city goes a long way towards helping in its urban development. And like Austin said, figuring out how to keep that talent and keep our young people developed and here in Fort Worth to continue lending their gifts and talents to the city.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we're excited for even next week too. We have another interview on the books with the new president at TCU, which is really exciting. Really, I mean, he's just started this month, so we'll be able to have that as well. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share with a friend. Also, if you're looking for more episodes, we have episodes with Robert Stearns, different people all across the city, from Cameron Cushman with Health Science Center, and we've had a great last week's episode. Last week's episode was one of my favorites, of just me and you. And so if you want to nerd out on some more of this stuff that we talked with Jared and Austin, check out last episode as well.
Yeah, thanks everyone for listening, and we will see you next week.
Follow us like double tap.